Good evening, welcome to This Week in Turkey. The police detained 13 academicians, business people, and journalists earlier in the day as part of an investigation into an association headed by jailed businessman Osman Kavala. Professors Betül Tambay, Turgut Tarhanlı of Istanbul's Bosphorus and Bilgi universities were among those detained in simultaneous police operations in Istanbul and in 3 other provinces. Earlier in the week, the European Parliament rapporteur for Turkey, Kati Piri, demanded a formal suspension of accession talks with Turkey in her draft Turkey report.
The report was presented to the Parliament on Wednesday and will be put to vote in the upcoming months. Continuing a negotiating process aimed at European Union integration of Turkey has lost all credibility under the present circumstances, Kati Piri said in the report. Piri noted that, apart from the clearly autocratic nature of the recently introduced presidential system, which lacks the necessary democratic checks and balances, it is impossible to ignore the further regression of the rule of law, with over 50,000 people, including journalists, politicians, and human rights defenders, still in jail since the attempted coup, and 150,000 civil servants dismissed without proper legal procedures. Commenting on Piri's report, Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu told reporters that, despite having met with Kati Piri prior to her earlier reports, Piri made no mention of such meetings in any of her reports. Çavuşoğlu added that, as the EP rapporteur is against Turkey, the report is as expected. Meanwhile, the Turkish foreign minister also said that the Turkish government will hold its second EU Reform Action Group meeting in the second week of December. We have already met 2 important priorities with lifting state of emergency and establishing state of emergency investigation commission. We will take necessary steps as well, Çavuşoğlu said. During December and January, the draft report will be put to vote in the Foreign Affairs Commission and General Assembly of the European Parliament. This will be the first time the European Parliament will vote on suspending accession talks with Turkey. The European Union Enlargement Commissioner Johannes Hahn had also told the German media outlets last week that it would be more honest for Turkey and the EU to go down new roads and end the accession talks.
To discuss the draft report on Turkey, joining me now is Ms. Kati Piri. Ms. Piri, hello. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
Ms. Piri, we gave an overview of your report, and I will go into the details in just a minute, but I think we can start off with the detainments from today. You made similar points in your report as well. How are you viewing these detainments?
Well, I think it came as a shock to everyone. I mean, it's a brutal assault on civil society, on academics, what we saw with these raids this morning, early this morning, happening inside Turkey. And we were all actually, waiting for the release of Osman Kavala, as after 1 year of detainment, there was still not even an indictment against him. And I think everyone knows that he has never had any political affiliation. He can't be credibly suspected of having done anything criminal. And now these raids are happening today with well-known academics. I think it's extremely concerning for everyone in Turkey.
Going back to your report, this is the first time we will actually, the European Parliament will actually vote on suspending the talks between Turkey and the European Union. Yes. There were signals from your prior report as well. Within this year, what actually changed?
Well, if you compare it to what the European Parliament said 1 year ago, it was that if these new constitutional amendments would be implemented, of which we have all known also the opinion of the Council of Europe, where Turkey is a member of, that these new constitutional amendments where President Erdogan can directly appoint judges, he can make laws by decree, he can dismiss the parliament, that there are no checks and balances left in the constitution of Turkey. Mm-hmm. And this comes on top of all the concerns we already had about rule of law, the lack of media freedom, the things that are happening today as well with all these detaining. And that all together, unfortunately, we come to the conclusion this year, now that these constitutional amendments have been implemented, that all the red lines for a candidate country has been crossed. And that's why I call in my draft report, with pain in my heart, for the suspension of the accession talks with Turkey.
But meanwhile, you're still calling for a continuation of the social dialogue, right?
Of course, I know many people, millions of people in Turkey, actually, want their country to be heading towards the same standards, the same rights and values that many countries in the West are having. And I don't think it would be fair to shut the door completely to the whole population of Turkey. So I want the EU to engage much more actively in trying to stop this breakdown of the rule of law in Turkey and to engage with people, whether it's through the customs union, whether it's through visa liberalization. I'm not arguing to having a transactional relationship only with the Turkish government.
I see. And when I read your report, there were many points in terms of, as you said, rule of law, human rights, and perhaps democratization as well. But there's a view in certain circles or certain opposition parties as well that perhaps such a call you made as suspending the talks between the EU and Turkey will cause more harm in terms of those aspects. What would you think of that?
Look, I understand the concerns. I have been visiting Turkey 1 month ago, had a meeting there also with the opposition leaders, with civil society, with people in different cities in Turkey, and there was not a single person who advised me to do this step. So I very much understand that a lot of people still see this as a hope, as an anchor. On the other hand, I'm also a European politician, and I'm very concerned also inside the EU when it comes to values. Let's take, for instance, the country where I was born, Hungary, where the direction it is heading, or what we see in Poland. And I believe that the EU, which is based on values, has to also express those values in its foreign policy. Perhaps call me naive in that, but I believe that that's the way the EU should function. And as I'm Turkey rapporteur, I cannot explain to anyone inside the Netherlands or inside Europe that we continue to pretend to talk with this government, this Turkish government, about accession when we see all the things that are happening inside Turkey.
There are certain issues that you mentioned in your report in terms of not the Turkish side, but the European side as well. And Turkey often mentioned these points as well. For example, you mentioned that the European Parliament had repeatedly called for the opening of chapters 23 and 24, but the Council stopped this. Looking back from the mid-2000s coming to now, there's a responsibility on both sides, I think. What would you say?
Absolutely. I fully agree with you. I mean, for a process to be credible, you need to know that the outcome is possible, right? And we already saw that even when things went well in the bright years of the early years of the AK Party government in 2004, 2005, when the accession talks were opened, we already saw some European politicians not being really honest about this process. We then had, for instance, President Sarkozy in France. We had Angela Merkel in Germany. We still have her, although she changed a little bit her rhetorics on it. There are some politicians who believe Turkey does not belong in the European Union. That's not my point of view. I would have never wanted to become a Turkey rapporteur for the European Parliament if I would not believe that Turkey doesn't belong to Europe. It is in Europe. It belongs to Europe, and I believe that would also be the best future for both Europe and for Turkey. When it comes to the instruments in the accession process, the opening of the key chapters would deal with rule of law, etc. The Council, from the beginning, the moment that actually Cyprus joined the European Union, there was no unanimity on this anymore. And along the road, you saw that the Council never was willing to use the instruments to its availability, nor when things were going good to encourage more reforms, nor was it able to act when things started to go bad in order to try to halt the deterioration in the rule of law. So this is very much also the responsibility of the European Union.
Do you think this actually broke Turkey's hopes?
I think at least it broke the hopes for the credibility of the process, also with many Turkish citizens for sure, and I can very much understand that.
And another point you bring up is a point that raises the eyebrows in Turkey as well, is the Syrian refugee issue. I believe you are calling the European Union states to keep their promises.
Yes, which they didn't, right? I mean, you know, I believe you can only be a credible rapporteur if you're also critical about the mistakes the European Union is making. I remember visiting in 2014, before there was any EU-Turkey deal, visiting Gaziantep, visiting Kilish, seeing already the effect that the Syrian crisis directly had then on Turkey. There were already more than 1.5 million refugees there. That was a time that the European Union didn't even speak about it, didn't really care, also didn't offer help to the Turkish population or the Turkish government in how to deal with it. This, of course, completely changed in 2015 when people started to coming to Europe in high numbers through Turkey, mainly to Germany and some other countries. Suddenly, there was a willingness to hold the EU-Turkey summit, which we didn't see for many years. Suddenly, the EU promised the world to Turkey. We promised to open accession chapters, we promised to upgrade the customs union, we promised visa liberalization, and we promised money. And aside from the money, all those other promises have not been kept by the European Union. And I, as a social democrat from the Netherlands, I also thought it was so important in this agreement that we promised to do a large-scale resettlement of Syrian refugees also to the European Union. Because this is a burden we should all be sharing together. And if I look back, since this deal was struck in 2016, we only transferred 12,000 Syrian refugees from Turkey to the 28 EU member states, and I think that's shameful for Europe.
Looking at Europe right now, do you see any hope on that aspect?
When it comes to refugees, you mean?
Yes, I do.
Well, you know, I think a lot of European leaders have kind of the feeling that for them the crisis is solved. They made a deal with Turkey. The numbers have drastically decreased. You see that a lot of borders have been closed down. There's still a lot of political rhetorics about it, but if you compare the numbers now of people arriving inside the EU, it's the same as it was before 2014. So it's not a higher number, but you see actually that a lot of populist politicians really use this crisis to have this fear-mongering against refugees, to have this fear-mongering against Muslims. We see it happening in various European countries, and that is, of course, you know, very painful for me to see.
At the end of the day, the report is still draft. How is the process going to go on from this point? I believe it's going to go through the bodies of the European Parliament.
Yes, first, next week we will have a first debate in the Committee of Foreign Affairs of the European Parliament. Then there's a chance for all my 751 colleagues to make amendments to the report. And I expect that every year that there will be a couple of hundred of amendments being tabled to the report. Then we enter into a negotiation phase, and we will vote in the Foreign Affairs Committee after New Year, so in January. And then it will go to the whole plenary, where all 751 members can put their vote to the report, and that will probably only take place in March.
And if it proceeds, is there any turning back?
I hope so. I mean, I think when it comes to the European Parliament, our reactions are to the policies of the Turkish government. As we discussed earlier in this conversation, it's the same European Parliament who for 10 years called for the opening of chapters. It's the same European Parliament who now also says we should use the funds available to help civil society in Turkey. Let's see if the customs union can also be used as a leverage on having some reforms in the field of rule of law. It's the same European Parliament who's still open to agree on visa liberalization if the anti-terror law will be changed in Turkey. So for me, from my side, it's not the end of the road, but we really need to see some very serious improvements by the Turkish government.
If so, would the negotiated chapters still be viable?
What do you mean with that? If we look, I mean, Turkey remains a candidate country. even if we suspend the accession talks. It remains a candidate country. And as you know, it's not the European Parliament alone who can call for this. There needs to be a unanimity along the European member states, which we know there isn't. There has never been a unanimity on anything with Turkey. So also not on this. So I expect, I believe it's important to give a political signal when we believe all the red lines have been crossed. But I very much hope this does not mean for the next 10, 20 years that this is the situation as it is.
All right, Ms. Kati Piri, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
On Tuesday, the representatives of the main opposition party, Republicans People's Party, and Good Party met prior to the local elections.
The delegations from the two parties came together late Tuesday in the Good Party headquarters, and CHP chairman Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu and Good Party chairwoman Meral Akşener had a brief meeting afterwards. The statements came from the parties after the meetings have suggested that the two parties exchanged views on the local elections scheduled for March 31st. A popular expectation from the meeting was the nomination of Mansur Yavaş, the former mayor of the Beypazarı district, who came second in Ankara in the 2014 local elections as a joint candidate for the capital. On a question of whether the CHP is planning to form an alliance with the Good Party for the candidacy of Mansur Yavaş, Kılıçdaroğlu said that their idea was to form partnerships with the electorate from all walks of life who believe they deserve to live in a better city. We will tell them, if you want to live good in this city, you should vote for us. We will also tell them to visit Ankara districts under CHP mayors and to observe the changes through their own eyes. I want to emphasize that our approach does not separate us and them. Everyone living in Ankara will win when the CHP candidate wins, Kılıçdaroğlu said. Contrary to speculations, there is no objection against the candidacy of Mansur Yavaş, he stressed. He is a person loved by our party fellows and Ankara people. We have no problem with his candidacy. The problem is how to run Ankara in an honest and clean way, said the CHP leader. On a question of who might be the party's candidate for Istanbul, Kılıçdaroğlu did not name any potential contender.
A New York Times report on Monday cited 3 people familiar with the recording collected by Turkish intelligence related to the killing of dissident Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi.
According to the New York Times, shortly after Khashoggi was assassinated last month, a member of the kill team instructed a superior over the phone to tell your boss, believed to be Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia, that the operatives had carried out their mission. The recording, shared last month with the CIA director Gina Haspel, is seen by intelligence officials as some of the strongest evidence linking Prince Mohammed bin Salman to the killing of Khashoggi. While the prince was not mentioned by name, American intelligence officials believe your boss was a reference to bin Salman. Furthermore, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan described the content of the tape related to killing of the journalist as a calamity and called on Riyadh to take concrete action against the perpetrators of the murder. Erdogan also said that a Saudi Arabian intelligence authority was shocked after listening to the audio recording of the killing of Khashoggi. All those who asked have listened to the audio recording of this murder. Our intelligence organization did not conceal anything. Besides Saudi Arabia, the United States, France, Canada, Germany, and the United Kingdom listened to this recording, Erdogan added. Meanwhile, Turkey has called for an international investigation into the murder of Khashoggi. At the current stage, we believe an international investigation is a must, Foreign Minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu said on Wednesday. On the other side, 5 Saudi officials faced the death penalty over the murder. Public prosecutor Saud al-Mojeb's deputy and spokesman Şalan al-Şalan said yesterday that 11 Saudis have been indicted. The public prosecutor has requested the death penalty for 5 individuals who are charged with ordering and committing the crime and for the appropriate sentences for the other indicted individuals, Şalan added, without naming the 5.
Turkish Statistical Institute announced that Turkey's unemployment rate rose to 11.1% in August, rising its highest level since early last year.
The figure was up 0.5 percentage points compared to the same month a year earlier, according to data from the Turkish Statistical Institute, TÜİK. The non-agricultural unemployment stood at 13.2% on average during the same period, the data also showed. The youth unemployment rate for persons aged between 15 and 24 was 20.8%, indicating an increase of 0.2 percentage points on a yearly basis in August. TÜİK said unemployment for the 15 to 64 age group went up 0.6 percentage points annually to 11.4% in August. The number of unemployed persons aged 15 years and over increased by 266,000 year-on-year to reach 3.67 million in August. The labor force participation rate also rose by 0.6 percentage points year-on-year to reach 54.3% in the month.
Turkish newspaper Daily Karar announced on Monday that business people and advertising agents have been urged not to place ads on newspapers.
A statement in the newspaper's Monday edition said, "We would like to inform our readers in the hope that the embargoes and pressures we've been subjected to will soon end." It also underlined that the pressure on the newspaper clearly violates the Turkish Commercial Code and other laws regulating competition and causes unsustainable financial problems. This is an open threat to freedom of the press, which is one of the foundations of democracy, the statement said. Karar Daily published its first issue on March 7, 2016. Most of its editorial board members and columnists had previously worked for pro-government news outlets. Many believe the birth of the Daily was the outcome of a difference of opinion between President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan and former President Abdullah Gül, along with former Prime Minister Ahmet Davutoğlu. Karar is known for its mild criticisms of the government from a conservative point of view.
Now let's take a look at what's on in Istanbul next week.
Mix Festival will turn Zorlu PSM into a giant dance floor this weekend for 2 days without interruption. In its third year, the festival will bring together some of the most prominent names from different musical genres. Polo and Pan, Aurora, Sophie Hunger, Glaswegian, post-punk group Undo, and Lossless are among some of the names. German producer and composer Hendrik Weber's minimal techno and electronic music project Panta du Prince will be on Babylon's stage tonight. After a 6-year break from solo projects, he released his latest album, The Triad, in 2016. His other projects include different remixes and arrangements he did for Depeche Mode, Animal Collective, Philip Glass, Block Party, Hertz, and Trentemoller.
That's all from This Week in Turkey. Thank you for tuning in and hope to see you next week.